So one of the things that impressed me when I was reading the manuscript for this book was that I really didn't need to do much editing of the poems. It was more about which poems to have in and a bit about the order. And there isn't really a flabby poem amongst them. So what's the secret?
Yes, flab.
Yes, I have no tolerance for flab.
No tolerance for flab. I knew that, and I know that with sort of nature-based poems, flab was never going to cut the mustard. Well, I think everyone who's working with words realizes that, in a way, less is more. So what you're trying to achieve is the maximum impact, emotion, information, experience with the minimum of intermediaries, the minimum of mess. And actually, if I can use a metaphor, because I was just out pruning my buddleia this afternoon, as one does in these rural parts, and it was just covered with old flowers, you know, old brown, sort of pretty grotty looking ones. But a neighbour told me that you can deadhead them and then you get new ones. So I thought, I'm going to deadhead this. So I deadheaded about 70 of these brown spent flowers and discovered that I had a lot of fresh flowers on there, that the bush actually looked really lovely. But without deadheading it, I wouldn't have known. So in a way, with poetry, what you're trying to do is get rid of anything that isn't serving the poem. Now, one of the way I do that is by having a go myself, but of course we have our blind spots. We all have our blind spots, and that's where other people can be so amazingly helpful. I can see people here from the Rottingdean Writers Group, and I can also see them from the Brighton Stanza Group. I can see people that I've actually workshopped with, and a huge thank you to everybody who's inputted in any of these poems. Because by sharing your poem with other people, you can get feedback about what perhaps isn't necessary. I think poetry is a little bit like comedy. So often, sometimes it is comedy, but you know, very often you see that the writer didn't trust that that first little phrase would get the laugh. And it gets a massive laugh. And then there's this sort of slightly anticlimactic sort of second phrase, you know. And I think with poetry, it's the same thing, that people will pick up if you lay the clues carefully. So, yeah, in answer to your question, I go through poems with a tooth comb. I take them to workshops to get other inputs. You don't always actually take everything on board that people say, but you know, you're a fool not to consider it, at least. And the other thing is, quite a few of these poems have been published in magazines, and I think that's quite a useful way of going about it, because believe it or not, believe it easily, I get rejected a lot. So my poems get turned down on a regular and frequent basis.
How very dare they?
So yes, it's outrageous, isn't it? So each time they come back, I will look and think, and often I'll think, well, no wonder they didn't take that one. My goodness, you know, I need to cut that out. And eventually, if it gets tight enough, someone takes it, and then it's almost for me a vote of confidence. It's like, okay, yeah, this one's ready to go into a collection. And I can quote Sylvia Plath here, we worship. She actually said she really welcomed rejections, which is hard to imagine, because it is always a little bit, you know, sad when you see that, no thank you. But she welcomed them as a way of improving her work. So I think that's a really healthy way to look at rejections from whoever, you know.
Yeah. And one of the things I neglected in realizing I hadn't got your biography there was that I accepted this book a long time ago, and when it got round to, okay, now we need to start working on it, and I looked at it and thought, why on earth did I accept a book of nature poems? I don't publish nature poems. I'm not interested in nature poems. And I reread it and I thought, oh yeah, that's why I accepted it. And it's because, yes, they are nature poems, but they're not just nature poems. There is never just a, isn't this pretty? There's always a reason you're telling us something. And the manifold layers of what you're being told is what interests me. And my rule of thumb for publishing something is that I will have to read something forensically at least 7 times before it actually hits the shops.
Oh
And
my
then I will
goodness,
have to
Jo.
listen to it at least 3 times, and probably a great deal many more times than that. And do I want to? And if I go, yeah, I don't publish it. And I absolutely did not go, yeah, about this. So it's, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm happy to listen to that over and over and over and over and over and read it over and over and over. That's absolutely fine, because there's so much depth to them. So that wasn't the question. That was just me going,
Well,
yay,
thank
Claire.
you.
So if anybody's got some real questions as opposed to yay, Claire's, I mean, by all means, say yay, Claire, anytime you feel like it. But if anyone's got any questions, I mean, we'll have another opportunity at the end, but this is an opportunity. Anyone? Oh, we got something.
No,
when did you start writing poetry? This is from Tara.
Oh, I started writing poetry probably at primary school. I suspect, like everybody, we had our little, which is great. And I wrote short stories and little plays. And then I really got more involved in playwriting for quite a few years. But I never stopped writing poetry. And what I found was I would write a poem at moments of great importance, you know, a grandmother dying, getting my first job, you know, those sort of things, because it almost feels like you need that heightened jewel-like quality of a poem that just encapsulates something that kind of really, I don't know, can't be expressed in any other way sufficiently well. And then eventually, I mean, to answer your very long-winded way of answering, Tara, is, I suppose, seriously, I started writing about 12 years ago. By seriously, I mean I started to try and improve what I wrote, try to see what I could do, what my scope was, went to workshops and started to submit for magazines. So yeah, about 12 years, I suppose. Yeah.
Did your poetry change when you moved from London?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a delay, there's a sort of time lag in. Some poems take, when I say they take 10 years to write, let me just clarify, I'm not sitting at my desk for 10 years on one poem. But, you know, you write it, you think, oh, I'm not sure, this is going nowhere, you leave it. 5 years later, you find it again, you find a new way into the poem, you have another go, perhaps you don't quite get there, and then suddenly there's a call for a theme, for example. Quite a few poetry magazine ask for themed, you know, they sort of say poem about tractors, you know. If that was really wacky, because that tractor poem was in Rialto magazine, which some of you will know. And when I bumped into the editor, he said, oh, I love poems about tractors. And I thought, how do you know that it is so random when you send a poem out as to how it's going to be received? But yeah, he loves poems about tractors. So, you know, you pull out your tractor poem, dust it down and off it goes. So has it changed? I think there is more nature, but there always was nature. I used to wander around Tooting Beck Common, looking at the birds, imagining I was walking down the little path in the country. I mean, I love Tooting Common. I miss it greatly 5 years later. But yeah, let's see. There might be greater changes still.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, yes. Sukima says, who do you rate as your major influences from the poetry world? and why?
Oh my God. Okay.
So you can't just make a list.
No, I can't make a list. Ted Hughes, for that, it's just the force and the power of the writing. Trying to think who else. I mean, the romantic poets on one level. I mean, gosh, you don't even say the name. You know, your name in the same. But anyway, you know what I mean. Just the Keats, for example. I love, I mean, contemporary poets. I love Claudine Tunji very much because I love the drama in her poems. Mimi Calverty, because I really, really admire the precision of her work. Dylan Thomas, not because I can write anything like Dylan Thomas, but the sheer flow and rhythm and music is something that really, you know, I try. I'm unfortunately not blessed with, well, I've got a good ear, and I can sing, but I can't read music. I'm absolutely rubbish at anything involving staves or anything like that. But so the nearest I can do to create music is write poetry. So yeah. And there's bound to be masses more that influence me, but we'll stop there for the moment.
Okay, so Kate is asking, who are you reading right now?
Oh, right. Well, I have a pile. I have a pile. I'm reading a poet called Alan Price, who combined with an artist, and I'm afraid I can't remember the full artist's name. He's a Moroccan artist. I have got the book down there, but I don't want to upset my lighting set up here. So I might or do anything jinx my microphone. So, but I love the way he writes and is inspired by art. And I mean, you know, ekphrastic poetry inspired by visual art, I think is great. Who else am I reading? I'm reading Alison Brackenbury's Gallop. And again, I so admire the way, well, she's a nature poet. I mean, she's a poet who writes of nature as many other things. I do have quite a pile, but I'm just looking around to see if I can catch sight of it. Quite a few magazines I haven't got through Stand. I've got to read through Dark Horse. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing. But what's great about poetry is it's one poem at a time. Usually, unless it's obviously a series. So, you know, you can just pick up the book, read one poem, carry on. When you feel the urge for another poem, read another one. In many ways, that's the best I find for me. I almost never sit down and read a whole collection in one sitting, even though it's certainly possible to do. Because I think I just want to digest and chew over and experience, you know, and not kind of rush through. But I'm like that. I'm someone who will read a book 3 or 4 times, you know, so there we go.
John says, do you have a particular time of the day to write?
Yes, I will tend to write in the morning because that's when my brain is best. And also it's when you really, what I should do is get up at 5 in the morning. I can see my friends in Germany laughing. That's, you know, the brain is hopeless after midday. I write in the morning. If I could get up at 5:30 and write, that would be even better. But often I just get, it's almost like you're in a hypnagogic state, which is when you're just waking. And quite often I can get sort of either dream poems. I'll read a couple of dream poems in the second half. That's dreams inspired, you know, dream inspired poetry. Or just you suddenly get the solution to a problem. Anyone who writes knows that, you know, you chip away, you think, oh, this isn't working. What can I do? It's that. And then suddenly, bang, you've got the solution or a solution. And it's just come from, I don't know where. So morning is best for me. I can write in the afternoon and the evening, but I would never edit in the evening ever, because I would make lots of wrong decisions for sure.
Right, thank you. Rodney says, did you move to Rottingdean because of its association with folk music?
It's a brilliant idea. It was far more pragmatic than that. It was like, I don't drive, so I can't live in a village that doesn't have a good and regular bus service. We thought of Brighton, and then we decided it was just a wee bit too happening for us. So Rottingdean was like the perfect solution. It does have a wonderful, I mean, there's the Coppers, the folk musicians, who I was lucky, I've obviously the original Coppers go back hundreds of years, but I did see old Bob Copper before he passed on at university when I was at Sussex. There's of course Rudyard Kipling, there's Burne-Jones associations, there's National Velvet, was written here, and so yes, there's but that's not really. I could pretend.
It was the buses.
It was the buses. Life can be very dull, can't it?
Okay, we need a bus poem next.
I do have a bus poem, actually.
There you go.
Funny enough.
Okay, Sukima asks, which magazine do you repeatedly submit to, and why?
Oh, right. Magma. Repeatedly, because I love the way they have different themes each time, and importantly they have rotating editors, so that you can just submit knowing that it can be difficult if there's an editor that doesn't really like your work, then in the end it's almost pointless submitting. So I love Magma. It's I love the shape of it and the the quality of the writing. Stand, I'm just going through the ones I've got a current subscription with. Stand. Stand is a magazine that is sort of shaped for shorter poems, that they can be more long lined, and that can be quite nice to be able to have longer lines that don't kind of fall off the end of the page. Poetry Salzburg Review, because it's probably got the widest range of kind of poetry. It'll have everything from, well, not quite limericks, but almost, to really experimental poetry. I enjoy reading that one and submit quite often. And I submit to Rialto. I don't often get in, but I do keep submitting. But I think probably Magma would be my number one if I had to settle on one.
Okay, and Terry says, pamphlet or book?
Pamphlet or book? Well,
what meanest thou, Terry?
that is a haiku, isn't it? Pamphlet or book? Well, I mean, this is a book in as much as longer than the pamphlet. I think pamphlets go up to about 34 pages maximum. I just do like things shorter rather than longer. But I don't know. It's for everyone to decide. And, in a sense, does it really matter? It's, whether you enjoy the poems, whether it's a book. I mean, it's a book because a book is something that has, it contains pages in between a cover, I suppose. Is that a definition of a book? I'm not sure. Definitions of book, please.
Writing between cardboard.
Writing between cardboard, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose pamphlet and chapbook is an lovely old-fashioned word, isn't it? Which is really another word for pamphlet. So, chapbook, pamphlet, collection.
So Sukima has another question for you. Mm-hmm. Mary Oliver wrote in her last chapter of her poetry handbook that her minimum number of drafts is 8. What is your, on average, minimum number of drafts?
Oh, Sukima, you keep coming up with some good questions. Oh, well, I think we need to define draft. If you're talking about literally a word here or there, then probably 30, but I think what you mean is, so what I will tend to do is I'll write notes. You could argue that's almost a draft. I'll then have a bash at it and I wait for the moment to be right, you know, when it feels like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And then I'll produce a draft, which I know isn't finished. Then I'll go into it. So this will be the third draft. I'll go into it and start trying to see what I've got and what I haven't got. That might take 4, 5, 6, 7 drafts. I'm at 8. I definitely, I can't. Very occasionally something will gel really quickly. And some of my poems have had, I definitely 20 or more drafts, but that's, I think, partly because I'm still finding my way with form. By form, I don't necessarily tend to, not write with, sonnets and all the various forms, but nonetheless, it's how you present the words on the page is so important to how those words come alive to the reader. And often I have trouble, I'll think of couplets, then I'll think of quatrains, that's 4-line verses, then I'll think, oh no, let's go prose, I'll go prose, and I'm still finding that takes more time than perhaps it should. But hey, it's 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration, isn't it? So.
Okay, so Sukima has another question. I think we'll make this the last one for now, otherwise we'll get ourselves down rabbit holes. Do you write directly on the computer, or are you do you draft on paper first?
Well, I used to draft on paper, but I have to say now, I usually draft in my mobile phone. By draft, I mean literally put every time I have a thought of what might work in the poem, and then I have a go on screen. Sometimes I'll do automatic writing with my hand to just see if I'm stuck. I think because it's so handy, on screen, you just move it around, you cut and paste, you can experiment and see, I wonder if it would look good if I did, oh no, that's awful, I won't do that. So the answer is really on screen. And I think as more and more of us use typing as typing or finger touching as our main means of writing, it will become just so natural that it feels almost slightly artificial to write. I mean, it is worrying in a way, but I find writing with my handwriting, it's a bit tiring, isn't it? The wrist action is a bit. So no, it's usually straight onto the computer, but with all these drafts, so it's not like it just appears looking all wonderful in one go. No, alas.
Okay, thank you. Have you written any poems in response to the climate crisis? If you have, would you read one?
The answer is yes. Quite a few of my poems increasingly are either indirectly. I mean, the Gaia in the back garden is an indirect, it's like we must listen to the world, and the hope lies with children and young people and people who have such a vested interest in the planet, rather than, obviously at any age we can do our part. If we're going to go out on the long man, perhaps we can just leave it. We actually filmed me in front of the Long Man of Wilmington reading the poem about the Long Man. Shall I share a little bit of information about what posture I was in, Cherry? Or
yes, I think you definitely should.
Right. The only way we could get me and the Long Man together in the same square was by
not have your book over your face.
And not have my book over my face, because the slopes, there's nothing but slopes wherever we go, was for me to kneel throughout the entire poem. I don't think you would know that if I didn't share it, but I am kneeling through the poem. So we're going to go out on that one, aren't we, Cherry?
We are. So if there are any other questions before we do that. No.
Well, it is nearly 9 o'clock. Gosh, it's amazing how time flies.
Okay, well, in that case, I will get that ready.
And can I say thank you to everybody for being here, and it's so lovely to see you and to have your questions and have your support, and yeah, just really lovely to be there. So thank you.
Long man dreaming. Fishtail clouds swim between my car wipers, rain pools swishing back and forth, quick, quick, slow. I pull up and park at the foot of the giant. He's watching the heavens for weather, fierce in his newly breeze-blocked body. Thoughts lost in the transparency, flying with geese. Inside the carburettor, petrol chatters its abrasive dialect of long-dead foliage. We sink into blue haze. A brook has begun to babble through my head. The leather seats are growing back their bones. The walnut dashboard sways, gives shade. Fish will inherit the earth, booms the giant as he sluices against currents with his upright poles transformed into oars. They slap, slap between drowning steeples. Tractors floating belly up, corpses swept along in huddled herds. A mackerel shoots rainbows across the car bonnet. Lobsters have tethered themselves to the pay and display. Their bubbles scatter like petulant bullets. I rummage for my parking coins, find flint stones. Is it too late to buy a ticket?
Thank you. Thanks, Cherry.